There's a lot to talk about. So let's start with meter. Meter is definitely the most important new mechanic they've been adding to the game. You gain meter, it appears, by dealing damage to people. Seems like you get a little bit from being hit. And this is going to be the cornerstone, I think, of player expression in this game. They showed off a couple ways to use meter. They showed off slime cancels. They showed off slime dashes. And they showed off using meter to power up your moves. But it appears that there's a bunch of other ways that meter is going to get used. We've learned there are things such as slime block, for instance, and also EX strongs. Both of these, I think, are going to be very unique ways to use meter, in addition to the ways we've already seen. I suspect that what we're going to observe here is a lot of usage of kind of these core ways of using meter. Things like slime cancels and things like burst, because these are very tangible ways of burning meter to get an advantage on your opponent. Some of these other ways are going to be very dependent on how good they are for a given character. EX moves, for example, using your meter to power up your moves, that's going to be very dependent on if the character has good moves to power up. And we haven't really gotten a good signal on how good the EX moves are going to be. We have seen that SpongeBob has a triple bubble, which in theory sounds like a very good move to use. But we're going to have to wait and see a lot more about the characters before we can really say how much a mechanic like that's going to be used. And another thing that we've learned is that supers are going to be competitively viable. This is something that's rather interesting. If you look at a lot of other platform fighters like Smash, you're going to see that final smashes aren't exactly competitive. In other games like PlayStation All-Stars, we've seen it kind of become a cornerstone mechanic. And it sounds to me like they're going to go with a different direction for this. I believe they're going to go with a direction where the supers are something that you could do, but not necessarily something that'd be common. Another thing that's going to discourage supers is that we've learned that each subsequent bar of meter is going to take more charge to fill. So this is going to create a gameplay that encourages heavy use of meter, and I think that's going to start tilting things toward using your slime cancels, using your your slime dashes, because you want to sort of use those cheaper bars. One other thing that we've learned is that slime cancels may not necessarily be the best way to kill someone. We learned that it strongly scales back your knockback, so if you were to hit someone, cancel it, and hit them with something hard, you're not going to necessarily kill them. So again, this is something I think we're going to have to wait to see how it works in practice, but it sounds like they're putting in mechanics to try to prevent degenerate uses of mechanics like slime cancel. Focusing in a little bit on some of these other things, it's a little unclear how we're going to see slime dashes used. On paper, it almost seems like a drive rush mechanic, almost like out of Street Fighter 6, but very unclear if it's going to work that way. It doesn't sound like they're going to have the plus frames that you're getting out of the drive rush in Street Fighter 6, so it's probably going to be less of a centralizing mechanic, but perhaps it could be used to follow up combos. You can use it to quickly dash over to a location that you wouldn't anticipate. You could also use it in disadvantage to try to shore up your recovery and get back to stage. So slime dashing, it sounds like, could potentially be a good use of meter in certain cases, but we're going to have to wait to see how it kind of plays out on the offensive side. Another thing that we've kind of seen is that burst, it appears, can only be really used at a hit stun, and it seems to be a somewhat laggy mechanic. This is probably going to result in burst being very much a thing that you still going to leave you in disadvantage. I think burst is not going to be a get out of jail free card here, not with the amount of lagginess that it has. And the fact that it can only be used at a hit stun and it's so laggy to deal at the hit, I don't think we're going to be seeing some really degenerate uses of this on the offensive side of things, but that shouldn't be too surprising for a burst mechanic. Another interesting thing to note here is the 1-up special for airtime unless you get hit. This sounds like it was added to try to prevent off the top kills by chaining up specials together with cancels. Kind of a nice little touch. It also seems like this also is going to prevent you from coming back from deep in the abyss by doing an up special, slime cancel, up special. So it seems like some of the rules of the game are going to maintain themselves even though there's these new cancel mechanics. Another interesting call out is despite having Guilty Gear mechanics, there is no such thing as a negative penalty in this game. In the Guilty Gear games, they try to penalize camping gameplay and try to make you want to use proactive, aggressive gameplay by by giving positive and negative bonuses to your meter gain. It sounds like this is not going to be something that's going to exist. So despite the fact that a lot of these mechanics seem very much lifted out of the traditional fighting game scene, lifted out of Guilty Gear in particular, it's not going to necessarily come with everything that comes along with Guilty Gear. Overall, it sounds like there's just a ton of options here. And I think this is going to be something where we're really going to see players express how they want to play the game and how they believe the game should be played through their usage of meter. Are you someone that saves it up for supers? Are you using it to defensively with your bursts? Are you aggressively using slime cancels to build up more damage? Or are you using slime dashing to get in? Or maybe you're even keeping your eye out for these kind of more niche uses of meter, like slime blocking to try to prevent yourself from getting teetered at the ledge. Or maybe you happen to really know your damage percents and you know that using like an EX strong is going to help you get the kill. It's very much up in the air. I think we're going to see a lot of creativity with this mechanic, but it does come with some downsides. This is a somewhat opaque mechanic. This is kind of a difficult to understand sort of thing. There's a lot of things that you can do, a lot of ways that you can spend it, and it's not clear to me that players are going to be able to get the most out of this, especially if they're playing casually. I think this is a good reason why supers are in the game and why they're trying to make supers competitively viable, because if that didn't exist, I don't know if the average Joe is going to start slime canceling and busting out these crazy combos. This is also a problem for Guilty Gear. I mean, if you look at a lot of novice players, they aren't using their Roman cancels, and I expect the same thing to happen for Nick. I don't expect to see these kind of players at the start of the game or just new players in general to use mechanics like slime cancel. They're just a little too complex, and on one hand, I think this deeply enriches the competitive spirit of the game, but at the same time, it does make it a lot less approachable, I think, for a new player. So it is interesting to see them kind of push the game away from these kind of core, simple mechanics into something that is definitely a lot more competitively focused. I think it says something that they announced this at EVO, because that says to me that they're trying to make this in a very competitive thing. They wanted to show off these mechanics to a fighting game audience, people who were there to play and watch competitive fighting games. So I think that signals something about where they're trying to take the game, and I'm really hoping it works out because there's a whole lot of potential in there. Another thing that we've gotten a lot of clarification on is how the game is kind of different from Nick 1. I think that it makes sense to make a lot of changes from Nick All-Star Brawl 1. There's definitely was a lot of criticism of the game when it came out. One thing is that we've noticed that wave dashes appear to be slower than Nick 1, but they're still fast. This does open up a lot of new ways to use wave dash because they've already announced that the game has analog controls rather than digital. So in Nick 1, you had a limited amount of angles you could use for a wave dash. You could either go full to the side, 45, or nothing at all. So this opens up the whole range of angles in between. I don't think it's going to make a big difference how the game plays, but it is something that kind of gives more options. Another thing is that we've noticed that the landing lag and the knockback appear to be different than how it was implemented in Nick 1. Not many people know this, but Nick 1 had a very unusual knockback system. It was, I'm going to get too in the weeds here, but it was based on displacement rather than like for knockback force. It was very unusual, very hard to balance around, so I'm very happy to see that go away. Also, people don't tend to know that Nick 1 had a very unusual landing lag system, so I'm again excited to see that go away because I don't actually think these changes enriched the game. I think they just made the game a little weird, so I'm happy to see those things get changed. Another thing that came out of the change from digital to analog controls is that you no longer have to hit the jump button to fall through platforms, and I think this is big. This was something that I think they had to add to Nick 1 because the ambiguity around the controls. When you have digital inputs, it's not always clear if someone wants to drop through a platform or if they're just trying to crouch. This is something that it gets rid of that ambiguity. You can just tell by how hard they're pressing it. I do think it makes the inputs a bit more complicated, but it's similar to Smash, so I'm not expecting people to really complain too much about that change. Another thing that's noticed is that Jump Squat has been added to the game. This is something that I think will be a slightly controversial choice for people who really enjoyed Nick 1, but I think it's overall a good change. One thing that most people don't know about Nick 1 is that this sort of no Jump Squat instant movement sort of mechanic was actually really bad for the netcode. It was actually rather difficult to do rollback in those scenarios. So adding in something like a jump squat, I think really is going to make the online feel better, even if they use the exact same netcode. So that's something that I think is going to be a good change overall. It is going to make the game a bit more like Smash, but I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. There's also some news here about parrying. Nick 1 had a very unusual parry system where you had to hit the kind of opposite direction that the player attacking you was using and timing your block. It looks like they've taken out that direction mechanic and they've just moved it to just being shield timing. And they appear to have made it faster, not sure by how much. I don't think it's going to be a very big change. I think a lot of players who just kind of casually picked up the game didn't even know about the direction mechanic. I think that the sort of timing only mechanics actually going to be more approachable and more understandable to most players. So I think it's overall another good change. One of the big things that we're going to see lost here is actually the strafe button. The strafe button, I think, was a very unique addition to Nick because it allowed them to add in things like turning in mid-air, which is something that they didn't, that you don't see in Smash. So adding in something like this, I think, gave the game kind of a unique feel if you're really deep into it, but I don't think many players use the strafe button. So repurposing that button to sort of be a slime toggle, I think is going to overall be a good change. I think a lot more players are going to use the slime toggle. Probably a good move overall for the game. I think for people who are big fans of Nick 1, who are very fond of the strafe button, this is going to be a very unfortunate change. If a button had to go, I'm happy it was the strafe button. Another huge change is the fact that fast falling no longer requires an air dash. This, I think, is an understated problem in Nick 1. A lot of people who play the game complained about hurting their hands. Every single time you wanted to do fast fall, you had to hit a trigger, and a trigger press is rather hard on your hands. So switching this to a more Smash-like system where you just press down in air, I think is both going to help people transition over from Smash and also protect people's hands. I heard a lot of people talk about how Nick 1 was a complete hand destroyer, so seeing that go away is gonna be big. I think it's gonna really help people adjust to the game and keep playing the game because I don't think anyone particularly wants to play an RSI simulator. Another big change we got was about the grabs. Grabs appear to be now like Smash. We're no longer going to see everyone having a cargo throw like they're Donkey Kong. Okay. I think it's up in the air if that's a good thing or not. And they definitely have kind of pulled grabbing back to kind of how it is in Smash. So you're not going to be able to grab projectiles. You're not going to be able to do air grabs. And you're going to have a dash grab now, which is different than your regular grab. You have pummels. This sounds a lot like Smash. So I think they definitely have kind of brought the game to a more traditional position. You're seeing a lot of these sort of more unique mechanics in Nick 1 that, for better or worse, may have received some criticism, now get switched over to being more traditional, being more like Smash. I think to a certain extent, it does dilute the game's identity in Nick 1, but I think with all these other mechanics that have been added through the use of Slime Meter, I think the game is going to have a very distinct identity. It's just going to be very different from Nick 1. I think for the majority of players, that's a good thing. Nick 1 lost its player base relatively quickly, and I think that that's suggestive that people didn't necessarily enjoy the mechanical changes that were made to the game, and they dropped it. Perhaps with this more traditional sort of rollout, but still kind of keeping an identity of being kind of a fast game, replacing these sort of fast aerials with cancels and this sort of stuff. I think the game is still trying to maintain its identity as Nick without necessarily carrying forward the mechanics of Nick 1. We also got some kind of general mechanics news. One thing is that we now have 4 specials. Nick 1, you didn't have a distinction between neutral and forward special, so we're going to get a new special attack. And we see the return of the strong mechanic, which I think is a good thing. I actually think that Smash attacks are rather confusing for new players. The idea that the sort of strength that you have with the stick and the timing, it causes you to do a different attack, I think is rather confusing. I think a dedicated strong button is much more approachable. No rage like an ultimate. They're adding in SDI for people who are familiar with Smash. This means you can kind of like move a little when you're getting hit with your stick. I think it's a nice addition. I think it's going to add to the competitive depth of the game, even if most players aren't aware that it's a thing. It appears that the game is going with a more Smash 4-esque air dodge. The air dodge is not going to put you in fast fall. This also is distinct from Nick. Nick had no air dodges before it had an air dash system. And this is distinct from Melee, because Melee puts you in free fall. So I think we're going to see something more like Ultimate, more like Smash 4, and I personally am okay with that. I enjoy that mechanic. I think, again, if you were really into Nick for certain purposes, it's probably going to be a controversial change. I think it's probably going to be fine for most people. No shield poking. I don't think there's too much to say about that. Unless you're a huge melee fan, probably not a big deal. Things like tilt stick are in. I think this is going to be a big change. I think tilt stick was a huge addition for Ultimate that really made doing certain things more accessible with the C-stick. There are also some stuff here about taunts and how you could even slime cancel a taunt and gain meter from taunt. I think these are kind of cute details. I don't think that they are big changes, but I think they're cute details that show some of the care that's being put into the game. Sorry for the delay with this video. I really wanted to sort of cover all of these things that were kind of coming through the woodwork that weren't necessarily in the video that they had put up for the game, because we've actually learned so much about this that I had to re-record this video to cover everything that was being covered here. So thank you for watching with me. I hope you all enjoyed this mechanics breakdown, and I hope to see you playing Nick All-Star Brawl 2.